You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
Hey everybody, I want to take a few minutes here and talk about our sponsor, Splunk. You know, you need to keep operations humming around the clock, but potential disruptions are everywhere. Splunk helps you predict problems and find and fix issues fast, so you can reduce risk and ditch downtime. The world's largest enterprises rely on Splunk's unified security and observability platform to become more efficient, resilient, and innovative. With Splunk, you can react quickly, evolve faster, and be ready for anything. Stay ahead of disruptions. Learn more at splunk.com/resilience. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CyberWire's Research Saturday. I'm Dave Bittner, and this is our weekly conversation with researchers and analysts tracking down the threats and vulnerabilities, solving some of the hard problems, and protecting ourselves in a rapidly evolving cyberspace. Thanks for joining us.
We had a detection go off based on one of these static detections. So we saw a file that was it was not signed by a developer, which on the Apple platform these days is pretty strange. Essentially, we noticed that it also had a file name that it was assigning that kind of mimicked one of Apple's built-in processes. And so that kind of set this off for us as pretty weird and something we wanted to look more into.
That's Jaron Bradley. He's a director at Jamf Threat Labs. The research we're discussing today is titled Jamf Threat Labs Discovers New Malware Embedded in Pirated Applications. Well, let's walk through it together here. I mean, what is fundamentally at play here, and how would somebody find themselves falling victim to this?
Yeah, definitely. So after kind of taking this, what we discovered to be malware, and then tracking it backwards to figuring it out, to figuring out how it was, how it reached the databases we were looking at. Essentially, we saw that it was uploaded from a DMG file, which usually hold applications. It's generally how macOS applications are downloaded or distributed is through DMG files. And when we went and grabbed the DMG file that was responsible, we noticed that it had a app name and icons and everything that looked very, very much like apps that already existed, and therefore, it kind of clued us into these are, or this initial sample is probably very much, it's very likely it's a pirated application. Or a cracked application. And we kept pulling at that thread and looking around, and then sure enough, on the internet, on some different pirating sites, we found multiple apps that kind of had the same malware embedded within it.
Are there particular apps that they're targeting here, or are they going after a certain category?
It mostly seemed to be applications that were popular in some sense, or that many power users might even want to use. For instance, database management tools, shell applications, or alternatives to the terminal, remote desktop tools, a lot of power user type tools.
So let's say that I'm someone who's looking to get one of these pirated apps. I'm looking to save a few bucks for me, or goodness forbid, my company, and I download one of these DMG files, and I try to install it or run it. I mean, what happens next?
Yeah, in the background, you're essentially compromised. You're going to get some pop-ups from the operating system, right? Some warnings that say, "Hey, we can't verify the legitimacy of this file." But usually, when your users are downloading pirated applications, they're kind of expecting to see those pop-ups, right? They're expecting to have to click through a couple warnings when installing pirated or cracked applications. So So unfortunately, usually those warnings just kind of get blown right through. You get a working application most of the time, so long as these programs were cracked in the manner that that could still be successful. But in the background, outside of the app just working, which is of course presented to the user, there's a whole slew of things being done in the background that you wouldn't get out of the legitimate application.
Well, let's run through those together. I mean, what sort of capabilities do they have here?
Yeah, so looking into this malware, what we noticed was the Kepri backdoor being downloaded. Kepri is a open source project on GitHub, so anybody with some maybe some coding or GitHub experience could probably download that and compile it relatively easy. And it's very likely people are doing that. So it's a backdoor with built-in functionality. All you really have to do is host kind of a server, and then manage to get one of these clients that you've built with Kepri embedded in your malware, or convince a user to run it somehow. And these pirated apps were kind of that hidden way to do that for whoever the attacker is on the other side.
What do they seem to be after here? What's the information they're trying to gather?
Yeah, so it's hard to say exactly. There's a single payload, part of the malware, one of the final stages. The attacker had taken the command and control portion of that down, where the final piece of malware was being hosted. That could be anything. We did note some, with this malware, some similarities to the Zuru malware, which was definitely interested in stealing files, basically information it could get off your system about you, maybe your passwords, your keychain, stuff like that. But without knowing what that final payload was, it's likely that was a big piece of maybe the final objectives. But outside of those final objectives, there was a whole, as we said, the whole Kepri backdoor install would still allow the attacker to maintain a connection to the system, where essentially their objectives could be carried out through that backdoor, which has functionality for downloading files, uploading files to the victim, executing additional payloads or additional binaries that they might upload to that system, things like that.
Well, help me understand here. I mean, is the malware embedded in the pirated software itself, or is it installed separately and running, surreptitiously behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's behind the scenes. The way it's installed is actually pretty clever on the attacker's side. For those that maybe haven't been in the macOS world of security for super long, essentially a lot of malware that we've seen to date has been, even up till even up till maybe a year or two ago, there's just been a lot of malware that is an app. It convinces users it's legitimate, and it does some malicious stuff. Not a lot of creativity in terms of social engineering or getting being really convincing for users. But as of late, we've seen more stuff using techniques like we saw this malware using. And what that is basically someone has taken the application and they've added what we called a load command to the application binary itself. And what that does is basically it's when the attacker goes in and they manually modify some of the low-level components of the application to import an additional piece of code that is packaged and sitting inside the application bundle, and it does that without the user really being able to tell, unless you know how to do some reverse engineering, know how to use some different sleuthing tools on executables. It does this technique that we call like a dilib side load, essentially, and within that malicious library that it is modified, or within that library is where all the malicious code is held that kicks off the malware. So essentially what that does is anytime the user opens the application, the malicious library is loaded on the side and handles everything in the background. So yeah, all of that's being done in the background. Persistence is being set up, additional persistence, so that when you there's two ways it persists. You open the app. Right. Anytime you open the app, the malware does a little check and it runs itself again. B, it sets up a launch agent that will essentially also run anytime the computer starts the system. So there's two ways for the malware to run in the background, even if you're not using the app. It's still possible.
This episode is brought to you by Palo Alto Networks, the leader in cybersecurity. As AI-driven attacks increase, organizations can't afford to have network security that's stuck in the past. Discover how Palo Alto Networks can help you predict what's coming and proactively secure against it with a zero-trust, AI-powered network security platform built to secure whatever, whenever, wherever. To learn more, visit paloaltonetworks.com/network security platform. And would there be any indication to the user that anything was amiss?
No, there wouldn't be in this case. You could see apps possibly requesting permissions to do things. For instance, these pirated apps might be something might pop up and say Microsoft Remote Desktop wants access to your files. Right? Like macOS has some built-in features that will keep apps from accessing certain files until the user approves that. You might all of a sudden see some of these cracked apps requesting permissions to do things. But again, most users aren't going to think much of that, given that they're pirated apps and they kind of expect some of these warnings, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, when you talk about protecting yourself against these sorts of things, obviously don't download and install pirated apps. But what about at an organizational level? You know, if I'm running my business and I want to protect myself against, that seemingly well-meaning user who's maybe trying to try something out or save the company some money or whatever, is there anything I can do on an organizational level to try to protect my installed Mac systems from this sort of thing?
Yeah, this is a great question. And like you're saying, obviously the hands down no brainer, like how should you protect yourself from this is don't download pirated apps, right? Like you're 100% accurate on that.
Right. Yeah.
And not to mention like this is not the first time this has happened. This has been since the history of cracking and malware that malware has been embedded inside applications, macOS included. But from the organizational perspective, definitely harder, right? Definitely more difficult. That's why we have a whole company set up around trying to make things easier on Mac OS, is because originally these computers were built to be kind of personal computers. They were not really built to be in the corporate environment, and if they were, there was kind of hacky ways to get them in there. But we've been seeing more, right? It's not just the CEOs anymore who are using the Apple computers. There's plenty of employees that want that and want that freedom that Mac OS has to offer. So essentially, security software and policies, these are both things you're able to enforce in some manner using some different what's called MDM software. So the ability to kind of manage these Mac OS computers remotely as an admin in a similar way that you'd be able to do it, for a Windows computer. So really trying to enforce policy, running security software, like some people, they still they think Mac and they think, oh, it's inherently safe. I don't need security software. We would push against that, especially in a corporate environment, right? Where you can't really control what users are just going to go out and download on the internet. There's some good built-in security features from Apple to the app operating system. XProtect is one of them. It's a antivirus scanner that tries to scan things as you're opening them up, but security software is allowed to be a bit more flexible than probably Apple can be when they have to protect the entire world. And security software can kind of scope in on what threats are out there and provide additional coverage. So that would be my answer there.
You sort of allude to looking at this from a higher level, and I'd love to get your take as someone who is deep in the world of Mac malware. Can you give us a little bit of a reality check on the state of things? Because I think, as you say, I think lots of people on macOS have this feeling, some would say smugness, that, and by the way, I count myself as a loyal Mac user, so I'm calling myself out here, that they are better protected or that they don't have to worry about these things. I mean, what's the truth there? Where do we stand?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think, it does definitely open a lot of additional questions, right? Like a lot of us still remember looking back on the commercials with I'm a Mac, I'm a PC, like I don't have any viruses, look at me, and like and that stuck with a lot of us, I think. In reality, it's just not true anymore. An example that I give a lot, if anyone's read the Cuckoo's Egg, it's a book by Cliff Stoll. It's a book about one of the first nation state intrusions, really, at least the first recorded one, I guess I should say, about a guy who was working at Berkeley, and at the time he had found an accounting error. Like on one of the sheets for who was paying for the internet. Somebody was getting away with free internet time. This was a thing back then. But the operating system of choice there at Berkeley at the time was not, it was not Windows. It was not Apple's platform. It was FreeBSD or some form of Unix, right? And this is what attackers were going after because it held all the research. And the attack at a high level looks very much the same. Attackers get on a system, they move about laterally, they find the good research, they find a way to get that research out to their systems. So what that really tells us is it's not about the security of the platform. It's about the market share, really. What systems do attackers need to be familiar with to get the good data? And I think as we see the Apple market share kind of continue to shift and continue to gain a little more momentum in the workplace, we're going to continue to see more and more malware coming out for Mac. And if you kind of look at the Mac malware of the past few years, you'll see that is indeed true. As the market share has shifted a little, the malware has come more and more to light.
Our thanks to Jaron Bradley from Jamf Threat Labs for joining us. The research is titled Jamf Threat Labs Discovers New Malware Embedded in Pirated Applications. We'll have a link in the show notes. And now, a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud, the cybercrime analytics leader. SpyCloud disrupts cybercrime by telling you what criminals know about your business and your customers, so you can take action to prevent ransomware, session hijacking, account takeover, and online fraud. SpyCloud constantly recaptures and analyzes new data from the criminal underground, including credentials, session cookies, and PII siphoned from malware-infected devices. With knowledge of the specific exposed data criminals have in hand from InfoStealer malware on managed and unmanaged devices, security teams can respond with a more efficient and effective process called post-infection remediation that fits seamlessly into existing incident response frameworks. Get SpyCloud's post-infection remediation guide outlining the 7 steps for preventing a malware infection from becoming a full-blown ransomware incident. Visit spycloud.com/cyberwire. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. And we thank SpyCloud for sponsoring our show. The CyberWire Research Saturday podcast is a production of N2K Networks. N2K Strategic Workforce Intelligence optimizes the value of your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your team while making your team smarter. Learn more at n2k.com. This episode was produced by Liz Stokes. Our mixer is Elliot Peltzman. Our executive producers are Jennifer Iben and Brandon Karpf. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time.